at the primary. The only problem is that Jeannie only gives you 3 wishes, and progressives want a lot more than that.
And she's the Minnesota senator running for president. Dan.
Well, I'm giving a miss to Britain's parliament, which seems to be literally melting down over Brexit. I mean, the deadline of March 29th is fast approaching. But the only thing that looks like there's going to be a British exit is the parliament itself. In the past week, 7 members of the Labour Party quit. 3 members of the Conservative Party quit. More are threatening to do so. I'll tell you, Paul, our Congress, by comparison to these people, looks like the golden age.
And that is saying something. All right. If you remember, if you have your own hit or miss, be sure to tweet it to us at JER on FNC. That's it for this week's show. Thanks to my panel. Thanks to all of you for watching. I'm Paul Gigot. Hope to see you right here next week.
Let me start with the Fox's alert. We're told a Boeing 767 cargo jet has crashed in Texas. It went down about 30 miles southeast of Houston's Bush International Airport. The plane reportedly traveling from Miami International to Houston. The FAA has issued an alert on the Atlas Air flight after it lost radio and radar contact. Atlas Air is a cargo operator. Reports say there were 3 people on board. We'll have more on this developing story as we get it. Meanwhile, down south, there have been violent clashes on the streets of Venezuela and the country's borders today, as opposition leader Juan Guaido vows to bring in trucks filled with aid from neighboring nations and the U.S., despite objections from disputed President Nicolas Maduro. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new hour of America's News Headquarters. I'm Eric Shaw.
And I'm Arthel Neville. Maduro announcing he is severing diplomatic ties with Colombia. Today, he's announcing that, blocking the desperately needed aid from moving over the border. Brian Yenes is following this developing story for us, and he has the latest now. Brian?
Hi, Arthel. Well, there are at least 2 dead and 18 injured on the border between Venezuela and Brazil, according to a reputable nonprofit that tracks violence in Venezuela. Colectivos, or these private armed gangs that are in support of President Nicolas Maduro's regime, opened fire on civilians, killing at least 2 and injuring 18. It's just one of the many clashes that we are seeing on the border. This is a live look right now on the Bolivar Bridge, which is in between Cucuta, Colombia, and Uriña, Venezuela. There have been trucks of tons of humanitarian aid from the United States in Colombia trying to make their way to desperate Venezuelans in Venezuela today. And as you can see, there are people here that have been trying to get those supplies in. Police fired gas canisters, and they have at protesters throughout today. We've seen these clashes throughout that border. At the same time, Venezuela's President Maduro gave a speech in Caracas vowing to defend Venezuela's independence with his life if necessary. He also announced that Venezuela broke all diplomatic ties with Colombia. The opposition leader, Juan Guaido, the 35-year-old who's recognized by the United States and 50 other nations as the legitimate interim president of Venezuela, was seen on board a humanitarian aid truck in Cucuta today. He says some trucks have made their way into Venezuela. This is something that we have not been able to confirm, but he urged thousands of Venezuelans to show up at the border crossings to force the aid trucks through today. In this video tweeted by Guaido, Venezuelan military members are deserting the Maduro regime and joining the opposition. U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton retweeted the video urging more Venezuelan soldiers to join Guaido. And Guaido tweeted this earlier today, quote, "Anyone who is not on the side of the people and who prevents the entry of humanitarian aid is a deserter who betrays our people. Those who accompany us to save the lives of Venezuelans are true patriots." So border clashes and standoffs continue. The opposition is trying to win the hearts and minds of the civilians. The Maduro regime, well, they are vowing to stay, but Maduro is vowing to block humanitarian aid shipments, and he sees this as a ploy for the United States to overthrow him. Eric, Arthel.
Brian Yenes, thank you very much.
And for more on this, let's bring in Jim Carafano, national security and foreign policy expert with the Heritage Foundation. So, Jim, what do you think it will take for the military brass, the power in Venezuela, to potentially turn on and abandon Maduro?
Well, I think we're already seeing signs that that desertions are happening, and the pace of the desertions has actually picked up over the last week. I think mark today on the calendar, because we may have hit a tipping point. not whether the regime stays, because Maduro, I think, is a dead duck, but whether they get to exit with their money and go get to live in Switzerland or something, or these guys wind up getting, hung up in the streets by their thumbs. Because as the violence escalates, the likelihood that they're going to be able to make a graceful exit, I think, declines pretty quickly.
Now, who would give them refuge? You think Russia, Iran, because of the support of that socialist dictatorship, basically regime, will do that? I mean, what do you think actually is going to happen?
Well, I think there were a lot of options on the table. I mean, the United States, there were widely reported there were secret negotiations with Maduro, that the United States was willing for him and the select elite to leave, take some of their money with them, just go someplace, Cuba, Russia, wherever. And that was the preferred course of action. But here's the problem. The longer Maduro sticks it out, and the more the violence over the humanitarian aid escalates, the more the potential is that the military or the people in Venezuela will take things in their own hands, and they will overthrow this government, and those guys won't get a chance to get out.
And what would happen if, as you just mentioned, the military, the possibilities of a possible military coup?
I think that escalates every single day.
And what would it mean if indeed that would happen, and Guaido would not then be seated as president?
I think in all likelihood, the military would very quickly recognize Guaido as president because there's such broad international support for that. The other option is they try to run the country by themselves, and they'd have to do that without international support, but also without being propped up by the Cubans and the Russians. Nobody wants to try to do that.
Yeah, what should the Trump administration do? I mean, the president has spoken out about this. They have taken action. Vice President Pence going to Colombia on Monday, so he's going to be right there in the region. And we've seen top-level officials from LA to Abrams and others right there at the border.
Yeah. So what? This is really the undiscussed thing. What the administration has done here has defied every single caricature of this administration that you could possibly say. They can't get their act together, that Trump's a puppet of Putin, that Trump loves dictators, that these guys can't muster international support. This has been a textbook case of exactly how the United States can lead and bring people together in their own self-interest to work and get rid of a terrible dictator. This has so far been a case study. And compare that to the last administration, which essentially enabled Maduro to continue in power. I mean, this defies everything the president's critics have said about him. And really, if the United States just keeps doing what it's doing, I think that's exactly the right policy.
Have they been able to thread the needle, so to speak, in order to have not the maximum pressure, but also have the carrot as well as not a big stick, as
Right.
they've been able to very sensitively navigate this very volatile situation?
And that's a key point, because this is very Trumpian. If you look at every competition, whether it's Russia, China, North Korea, or it doesn't matter, the president offers the other guy the off-ramp. There's always a way out. And then the administration has done that. They've done that repeatedly. Actually, I think they've done it quite brilliantly, saying, look, you guys can exit and this country can get on with its life. And I think that's a hallmark, really, of how Trump competes with other people.
And you've got a much broader issue here that has to do with the legacy of Hugo Chavez and Maduro and the dictator socialist squelching, bankrupting of that once prosperous nation to the desperate situation that it is now, and also denying Russia and Iran are two adversaries and certainly enemy, especially when it comes to the regime in Tehran, from having a major foothold in our hemisphere, in our backyard. Why is that so important?
Well,
And
look,
could this be a turning point, that this administration is able to actually achieve that? And that is huge beyond even what it means for Venezuela.
This is a complete transformation of the geopolitics of the Western Hemisphere. The United States is not only allied with countries in the hemisphere, the United States and Mexico and Brazil, really the big superpowers of Latin America, essentially are working in concert. And they have completely marginalized the Cubans and the Nicaraguans, and they put a lot of pressure on the connections that the Russians and the Chinese have in the region. It's really remarkable. And we were seeing before, we saw that in the 80s and 90s, kind of the flowering of democracy in the Western Hemisphere and in Latin America. And then we saw that kind of implode. And we're just seeing it blooming again. And it's happened under this president. And it's happened consciously because of the policies of this president.
President Ronald Reagan was able to achieve that in Eastern Europe. Perhaps President Donald Trump will be able to achieve that same legacy, certainly when it comes to Venezuela and those type of nations that are suffering from socialism and other ills like this. We'll just see what happens, and hopefully that it will be a peaceful transfer of power as we watch these demonstrations. Jim Carafano, as always, Jim, thank you for your insight today, and we'll be on top of this throughout the next 2 hours. Arthel?
Thank you, Eric. One-time Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort's sentencing memo has been made public. The redacted document filed by special counsel Robert Mueller dropping this afternoon. David Spunt picks up the story now from Washington. David, what can you tell us?
Hey, Arthel, good afternoon. A big document dump, if you want to call it, about 800 pages in total, including exhibits. But this is the actual sentencing memo. See all these black lines right here. This is the redactions that you are talking about. 25 pages. I spoke with our justice producer a little while ago who says there are no major bombshells here. In fact, many expected today to find out a specific prison recommendation for Paul Manafort, but there's actually no specific number mentioned. Now, the memo reads, quote, consistent with the practice the special counsel's office has followed, the government does not take a position with respect to a particular sentence to be imposed. Instead, the government sets forth its assessment of the nature of the offenses and offender and the applicable advisory sentencing guidelines and sentencing factors. Now, this news about Paul Manafort comes as an official with the Justice Department told Fox News just yesterday that the special counsel's report will not be released to the Justice Department this coming week. Court documents allege that Paul Manafort shared polling data with an associate who authorities argue has ties to Russian intelligence. Back in September, Paul Manafort pled guilty to 2 counts of conspiracy related to his lobbying work in Ukraine. As part of a plea agreement, Mueller's team originally planned to offer Manafort some leniency, but that all went out the window when a judge found that Manafort lied to investigators after agreeing to work with them. Mueller will turn his report over to Attorney General Bill Barr. It's important to point out, Arthel, this is not the only case on Manafort's plate. On March 8th, in just a few weeks, he will be sentenced in a Virginia case in Alexandria involving tax and bank fraud. Arthel?
And how long could Manafort serve behind bars?
Well, in Washington, we don't have a specific number, but in Virginia, that case I mentioned, 69-year-old Manafort could get up to 25 years behind bars in that Virginia case. In that sentencing memo right here, it argues that releasing Paul Manafort from prison presents a risk of him doing it all over again. Arthel? 25
years at his age is, in effect, a life sentence. All right. Thank you very much. Eric?
We have an update now. Emergency crews are on the scene of that 767 cargo plane crash that has occurred this afternoon in Houston, Texas. That airplane believed to have been flying for Amazon Prime, Amazon's delivery service, when it went down in Trinity Bay on approach to George H.W. Bush International Airport in Houston, flying from Miami International. Jackie Heinrich is here to update us on more. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, just getting some of that new information on the status of this flight. It was an Atlas airplane flying for Amazon Prime Air, one of 30 767s in its fleet. And according to information on its tail number, the plane was 26 years old. So, of course, a developing situation, very little that we know at this time. But what we do know right now is, according to the FAA, 3 people were on board, even though it's a large twin-engine cargo plane. There's no confirmation on fatalities at this time, but a local affiliate, news affiliate, is reporting that there were no survivors, saying they got that information from the sheriff's office. The FAA and NTSB do not release the names of people on board of aircraft. They said they wait for local officials to do that at the appropriate time, so we're still waiting on our own independent confirmation about the fatalities. But the Chambers County Sheriff's Office is on scene right now, and the local sheriff's office says that the plane crashed in the Trinity River near the end of Trinity Bay in Anahuac, Texas. The yellow line on your screen there is where the plane was supposed to go. The green line was where it ended up and crashed. It was flying from Miami to Houston. The FAA issued an alert on Atlas Air Flight 3951 after losing radio contact about 30 miles southeast of Houston's Bush Intercontinental Airport. FAA investigators are on their way to the accident right now. The NTSB has been notified. They will be the ones doing the investigation into what ultimately caused the crash. And according to Atlas Air, the plane can carry a maximum revenue payload of about 117,000 pounds. The company's website says it operates the world's largest fleet of 747 freighter aircraft. So no officials have spoken on the identity or the status of the three people reportedly on board that plane. Of course, we will update you, Eric, when we know more. Eric.
Very sad. The three people likely, of course, the crew on board that plane. We will get more information and bring it to you as well.
R&B singer R. Kelly being held on $1 million bond right now in a Chicago jail cell. The disgraced artist making his first court appearance this afternoon on charges he sexually abused 4 females from 1998 to 2010. Prosecutors say 3 of the accusers were between the ages of 13 and 17 at the time. Matt Finn is outside criminal court in Chicago with the very latest. Matt?
Arthel, R. Kelly needs to post only 10% of that $1 million bond, but R. Kelly's attorney says the singer is so broke he does not have $100,000 to bail himself out right now. So we're kind of on an R. Kelly watch to see if he somehow comes up with that money and gets himself out of jail today. Also, under the condition of bond, R. Kelly must turn over his passport, stay away from the witnesses, and also stay away from anyone under the age of 18. Right now, celebrity attorney Michael Avenatti, who represented Stormy Daniels, claims he is also representing at least one of the women in this case, and that he submitted a video to prosecutors that depicts Robert Kelly engaged in a sexual act with a 14-year-old girl. Today, the state's attorney here says the victim's aunt confirmed that that is her niece in the video. Here is the state's attorney and also R. Kelly's lawyer.
Unfortunately, the state's attorney now succumbed to public pressure, from grandstanders like Michael Avenatti and Gloria Allred, and brought these charges. Mr. Kelly is strong, he's got a lot of support, and he's going to be vindicated on all these charges.
In the video, the victim repeatedly says she is 14 years old. SE has identified the girl in the video as her niece, the victim in this case.
If convicted, R. Kelly faces 3 to 7 years for each of the 10 counts filed against him. Arthel.
Matt Finn reporting there live in Chicago. Thanks, Matt.
Well, Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan is making a surprise visit to the U.S.-Mexico border. Coming up, we'll show you what he's doing there as the Pentagon announces even more troops will be part of the security effort there. And Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden were the 2 prominent names in the Democratic field. One is announced. We're waiting to see if the other does the same. The odds in their candidacies next. Plus, President Trump says he is optimistic about a new trade deal with China after hosting Beijing's vice premier. We'll have a live report on what we can expect from the White House straight ahead.
I think the relationship has been very good. That's what I will say, more than anything else. As to whether we make a deal or not,
We're following this developing story this afternoon. An Atlas Air 767 cargo plane, believed to be flying for Amazon Prime, Amazon's delivery service, has crashed on approach to George H.W. Bush International Airport. You're looking at what we're told is the debris field. This is 30 miles southwest of H.W. Bush Airport in Houston. This is the Trinity Bay area on the mouth of the Trinity River. As you can see, debris and aviation fuselage parts, huge ones, strewn throughout that part of the bay. Authorities say 3 people were on board when this plane went down. Obviously, they are members of the crew. There are no word on fatalities, though some local reports claim that no one has survived this crash of a Amazon Prime 767 flying for Atlas Air, which is one of the largest air cargo fleet airlines in the world. Again, that 767 going down near Houston. We will, of course, have the latest developments and more information when there is an NTSB press conference or any other information to give you about this sad tragedy.
Record-setting snow in Arizona. Flagstaff, which saw a historic 36 inches of snow late this week. Snow even hit the Scottsdale Desert. The National Weather Service in Phoenix commenting in a tweet, "It has never been this cold in Phoenix on February 22nd. The last time it was almost as cold was back in 1897, Eric."
And now to the southern border. Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, well, they both are in Texas today to visit border facilities. You know, this comes after defense officials announced that 1,000 more active duty U.S. troops will be headed to the border next week to make a total of about 6,000 in that border security effort. President Trump yesterday discussed the issues surrounding the border.
Everybody knows we need border security. We need a wall. I think it's a very bad subject for the Democrats. We need a wall. We've apprehended more people than we have in many. It's costing us a lot of money with the military. We have a lot of military there. We have tremendous border control and border security there.
Jeff Paul is live in Los Angeles with more. Hi, Jeff.
Eric, Shanahan and Dunford hit the border today working to understand where the gaps in protection are and what DHS specifically needs. They've just wrapped up a flyover of the existing border fence in New Mexico just across from Texas. The area surveyed are two of the sites requested for prioritization for construction by the Department of Homeland Security in a letter sent to the Pentagon last night. Earlier today, the officials visited a National Guard mission where they were briefed on Border Patrol's capabilities, including mobile surveillance vehicles, ATVs, horses, and weapons. It was at this location where Shanahan and Dunford both fired off some version of a pepper ball gun at the barrier. Now, all this happening while the Trump administration and Democrats continue to square off regarding Trump's national emergency declaration at the border and Trump's push for a wall. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi just visited the border town of Laredo, Texas, saying there is no emergency and that the declaration violates the Constitution.
The wall is not effective. It's very expensive. It's nothing more than a campaign applause line for the president in one of his speeches. It has no merit in terms of effectiveness, cost effectiveness, and does not support the values of our country.
Now, the trip will also help Shanahan and Dunford determine how much money will be spent of the $3.6 billion allocated from the military's construction fund. Something else we should point out is in that letter to the Department of Defense, DHS requested, quote, fencing, while the DOD uses the term barrier. None of the officials, Eric, use the term wall.
All right, well, still, it's supposedly a steel barrier. Jeff, thank you. Arthel.
A teacher strike in Oakland, California, continuing into the weekend. Nearly all of the district's 2,300 teachers walked out on Thursday. They're demanding a 12% pay increase, while the district has raised its offer to 8.5%. Leaders say they will resume talks tomorrow. Separately, teachers in West Virginia, Los Angeles, and Denver schools have staged strikes over pay, class sizes, and education funding this year.
Well, the president meets China's vice premier. Coming up, we'll look how this impacts the trade deal between Washington and Beijing. And also, we'll have a lot more on the release of Paul Manafort's sentencing memo that just came out as we await the testimony of the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, next week.
President Trump says he's optimistic about a trade deal with China after hosting China's vice premier at the White House this week.
Is it more likely that a deal happens or doesn't happen? Speaking for the United States, I would say it's probably more likely that a deal does happen. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Ellison Barber at the White House now. So, Ellison, what came out of that meeting?
Well, according to the Secretary of Agriculture, China promised in that meeting to buy an additional 10 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans. That agreement reportedly came during the Oval Office meeting with the vice premier on a trade deal. There was talk of progress there, but we didn't get a whole lot of details.
Where do you think stand with Huawei and ZTE? Would you still consider a ban?
Well, ZTE paid a big fine of $1.2 billion, which nobody's ever even heard of before. And we want everybody to compete. And I guess it'll be somewhat of a subject that we're talking about here.
Would you drop criminal charges against Huawei?
We'll be talking to the U.S. attorneys. We'll be talking to the Attorney General. But we'll be making that decision. Right now, it's not something that we're discussing.
Mr. President, your officials mentioned that there was a deal on currency. Can you explain to us what that was?
Well, we'll let you know at the appropriate time. But we have a deal on currency and currency manipulation.
Negotiators are reportedly working on 6 areas for a broad agreement, and those areas, among other things, include forced technology transfer and cyber theft, as well as currency and non-tariff barriers on trade. Tariffs on roughly $200 billion worth of Chinese products are set to increase by 15% unless there is a deal by March 1st. But if progress is made, substantial progress, President Trump said he is open to considering extending that deadline. Arthel?
Hey, Ellison, before you go, what's the talk about President Trump's new nominee for UN ambassador?
Right, Ambassador Kelly Craft, she's well liked here. She played a big role in helping to renegotiate NAFTA, that new deal known as the USMCA deal, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. She was involved in those talks and was seen as a tough negotiator. She went through Senate confirmation and was formally sworn in as the U.S. ambassador to Canada in September of 2017. Fox News is told that she has a decent working relationship with Senate Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee. And since she was already and recently confirmed through the Senate confirmation process, the thought here is that she'll have a smoother confirmation process and less vetting issues. The president announced her nomination on Twitter, and just before that tweet, we're told that Ambassador Craft met with President Trump, as well as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton. Arthel?
Hey, Ellison Barber, thank you.
You bet.
And out of politics, some surprising news, we're told, for Senator Bernie Sanders as his presidential campaign launched with a massive fundraising haul this past week. A new University of Massachusetts survey of likely Democratic voters in New Hampshire, which of course is his neighboring state, well, shows the Vermont senator trailing former Vice President Joe Biden, who has not even announced yet, by 8 points. But an Emerson College poll shows Sanders leading Biden by 2 in that state. You know, the Granite State is home to the second Democratic presidential primary in 2020. Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report writes this about the senator, saying, quote, he's got a base of support that's significant, but there also are some real warning signs for him. The intensity of support for him doesn't match that of the other universally known candidates in the field, the one, Joe Biden. Let's bring in Alex Vogel, former general counsel to the National Republican Senatorial Committee, Democrat strategist Jason Nichols. Jason, let me start with you. You know, back in 2016, Senator Sanders was the one progressive, but now he's in a crowded field. What are his challenges?
Well, I think you've stated one is that many of the people in the establishment have co-opted his ideas. He also has to go up against Elizabeth Warren, which is, you know, someone who mirrors him in a lot of different places. So I think he's going to have trouble there. Also, of course, he has an issue with African-American voters. They don't necessarily trust him. He got shellacked throughout the South. He lost South Carolina by 50 points in 2016, and I don't think much has changed. So he's going to struggle there, and his strong point was in the Midwest. And I think if Sherrod Brown actually gets into this race, he's really strong in the Midwest, being a native Ohioan. And then you also have Joe Biden, you know, who's Scrappy Joe from Scranton, who I think will also appeal to those Midwestern voters. So I think he's got his challenges ahead of him.
Yeah, Alex, do you agree? What do you think about that? I mean, it also seems like, the Democrats, they're going to start carving each other up.
That's right. I mean, everyone remembers the line from the President's State of the Union, America will never be a socialist country. That was not an accident. 2020 should be, in any normal dynamic, a referendum on President Trump's first term, and that's really the sweet spot the Democrats are looking for. Here, you have Sanders getting in, a self-described socialist, and if this race becomes, and Bernie frankly helps make it this way, if this race becomes a referendum not on President Trump's first few years in office, but instead freedom and democracy on one side and socialism on the other, that's a pretty good path for the president to go through to get reelected.
Well, you know,
I think that's the biggest challenge.
You can see that happening already. I mean, Jason, you got videos of Senator Sanders back in 1988 when he came back from the Soviet Union praising the communist system, praising Cuba. I mean, is that what the American voters are going to want?
Well, I think that is somewhat of a challenge, but I also think, you know, younger voters don't view the world the same way. They are not afraid of the S word. They don't remember bread lines in the Soviet Union and, you know, the Eastern Bloc. They don't think about those kinds of things. What they're thinking about is, an expansion of the welfare state. And they want the things like free college, and they want, universal health care. And these are, things that I think are going to be very popular. And these are things also that even the establishment Democrats are embracing. So I don't think that socialism, the president is going to try and peg the Democratic Party with that. But I don't think it's going to affect the excitement for the party.
And meanwhile, there's a whole other issue going on with Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota. And that has to do with her tone and tenor, let's say. Some say that the attacks on her and reports are sexist, that she has anger, and she has mistreated, allegedly, some members of her staff. Here's what Kamala Harris said about that allegations today in Iowa.
A lot of us have spent the last 2 years, yelling at the TV, sometimes throwing things, individual and group therapy.
Well, Alex, you have a Republican in office now who is not known to be a shrinking violet. What do you think of these type of reports?
Look,
do they matter?
I don't think most voters are going to make up their minds based on how a given candidate treats their staff. That's historically not been a real driver. I will say the real issue for Senator Klobuchar's campaign here is these stories are coming from people who used to work for her. And that's obviously not helpful as she tries to roll out her candidacy. And she's going to need to address it and deal with it. I don't think it's a terminal issue for the campaign, but she has to deal with it. Frankly, one of the stories that came out was her yelling at someone because there was no silverware and she had to eat a salad with a comb.
Oh, man, yeah.
Honestly, I think she may have to explain to the voters why she would do that with a comb more than whether or not she yelled at someone. I think that's probably a weirder issue for her.
Let me read you what the campaign response is. They say, quote, "The senator has repeatedly acknowledged that she can be tough and push people hard, but these anonymous stories, some of which are just plain ridiculous, do not overshadow the countless experiences of people on the senator's team who she's been so proud to work with." But I mean, I got to tell you, Jason, you don't even have to watch Saturday Night Live. You know what's going to be on Saturday Night Live tonight? The comb. Eating salad with the comb. I mean, it's disgusting. I mean, maybe she wasn't eating with her hands.
How would you know? Have you done it?
No, I would never eat salad with my comb. I mean, I would do one of these.
Was that a used comb? I don't
she
know.
apparently took out a comb, and then she ate her salad, and then she's told an aide to clean it. That's the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think, number one, you can't say you're fighting for American American workers, and then treat your own workers poorly. I think we've also seen, other candidates. I would have to disagree with Alex a little bit. I think in 2008, a lot of people hit John McCain with his temperament and saying that he did not have the right temperament to be president. And I think that actually hurt him. Did it decide things? Is it a terminal issue? I would agree with Alex that I don't think it's terminal. But I do think that it's going to hurt her because you can't claim that you are for American workers, and a lot of American workers work in offices kind of like Klobuchar's, and if she's treating her workers that poorly, I think that's going to resonate with some voters. And also, eating with a comb, I'm not sure how you do that personally. I'm trying to figure that out, actually.
Well, Alex, you take the comb out of your pocket, maybe you just start using it like a fork, because apparently there was no fork.
Look, I will say, Jason mentioned John McCain. I was yelled at by John McCain. That's not an experience you forget. I was still pretty confident he was prepared to lead the country.
All right. Well, I bet he never ate.
He didn't win, though.
Well, I bet he never ate with the comb. Alex and Jason, wonderful. Thank you. I can't believe in the presidential politics we're talking about eating with the comb.
I mean,
would
look,
you eat with the comb? I mean, if you didn't have utensils.
I'm saying if you're not allergic, put the salad down, just eat the peanuts. You know, a comb? I don't think so.
All right.
Anyway, we move on. We go to this, Eric. Paul Manafort's sentencing memo is released. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's document calls out the president's former campaign manager for, quote, repeatedly and brazenly violating the law for many years. Manafort admitted to money laundering and is facing prison time after pleading guilty to conspiracy against the U.S. and conspiracy witness tampering. For more on this, attorney and Fox News Radio White House correspondent John Decker joins me now. Hello, John.
Hi, Arthel. How are you?
I'm well. So you probably know this, that yesterday, Special Counsel Mueller requested to file the Manafort sentencing memo under seal. But Judge Amy Berman Jackson told Mr. Mueller, okay, but you must also file a redacted version on the public docket. So will the Special Counsel's sentencing recommendation shed more light on how Manafort factors into the overall Mueller-Russia investigation?
Well, I've read the memo which was released today. There's a lot of redactions there. So to answer your question, no, based upon the redactions that are in this sentencing guidelines memo released by the Special Counsel's Office. If we see what's behind the redactions, we may get an answer to your question. But although there's no recommendation that the Special Counsel is putting forward, there is a suggestion that Judge Jackson follow the sentencing guidelines, which would call for Mr. Manafort to be sentenced anywhere from 17 to 22 years in prison. Keep in mind, he's 69 years old. And there's also the sentence which will be handed down shortly by a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia as well. That could call for a sentence in the amount of 20 years or so. So we're really talking about Mr. Manafort potentially spending the rest of his life behind bars.
So even in Virginia, is that still a federal crime, federal filing?
That's right. That's federal district court in the Eastern District of Virginia. And that has to do with bank fraud, tax fraud, money laundering, not filing as a foreign agent, a foreign lobbyist. These are all issues that also were covered in the D.C. trial as well, or D.C. plea actually as well. There was no trial in that particular case.
So quickly, just want to ask you then, because that's why I wanted to clarify this was federal, will Paul Manafort still be eligible for a pardon by President Trump? Or depending on the findings, could Manafort be too risky for the president to touch?
Well, you know, President Trump has actually expressed sympathy for what Paul Manafort is going through. There is the potential for a for a pardon by the president or a commutation of his sentence, which means that he would serve no prison time. We read reports this week that the district attorney in Manhattan is considering charges of his own. After all, Mr. Manafort was a part-time resident of New York State. So if the president pardons him for his federal crimes, that does not cover crimes that he may have committed in New York State. So he could then potentially still face prison time in New York State.
SDNY seems to be the workaround. Quickly here, let's talk about Michael Cohen. President's former personal attorney. He will speak to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees behind closed doors Tuesday and Thursday. Then on Wednesday, Mr. Cohen will testify in public before the House Oversight Committee. And meantime, you've got this report in the New York Times saying that Michael Cohen provided investigators new information on, quote, irregularities in the Trump family business. So should President Trump be concerned about any of this?
Well, there's going to be testimony, which is going to be a circus this week. It's going to be before the House Oversight Committee. We're going to see Michael Cohen. He's going to be asked a variety of questions from Democrats and Republicans on that committee. And I think we're going to be disappointed. And I say that because the answer that Mr. Cohen or his attorney will give throughout that hearing is, I can't give you an answer to that question, Congressman, because I've been advised not to do so by the Special Counsel's Office because of his ongoing investigation. That's why I think we're going to be disappointed in terms of the content.
Cardinal there revealing that documents on past abuse cases in the Catholic Church have been destroyed. And he's urging a new culture of accountability to try and restore trust. Chief religion correspondent Lauren Green is in Rome. She's been covering this at Vatican City. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Eric. Well, you know, those documents you talk about, that is within one diocese in Germany. And so the idea is that they don't really know how widespread this might be. And so they were revealing this. You know, this last full day of the summit had the bishops focus on transparency. And they were facing the ugly truth that they had not been as transparent as before, and they covered up many of the abuses. And abuse victims marched through the Rome's Piazza del Popolo, or People's Plaza, today as part of the ongoing presence here for this summit, putting the pressure on the bishops. There was including a delegation from Pennsylvania, the state where its grand jury report on clergy sex abuse last summer sparked the crisis.
So our journey here has just been to bring awareness to what really is going on. They say they want to help victims, but ultimately they're not.
Now, today, bishops also got a bit of a tongue lashing from a nun from Nigeria, saying that church leaders acted as hypocrites, parading as custodians of a moral authority, but keeping silent on abuse. And bishops said today they are seeing the light, meeting with victims and hearing their stories. And one German cardinal, as we're talking about, admitting that in one area in his country, a blatant abuse of power.
Files that could have documented the terrible deeds and named those responsible were destroyed or not even created. Instead of the perpetrators, the victims were regulated and silence imposed on them.
This is a Fox News alert, and we now have live pictures from Chambers County, Texas, where an Amazon Prime plane destined for Houston went down in Trinity Bay, which is southeast of the city, we're told. 3 people were on board this Amazon Prime plane at the time of the crash. Those are the details we have now. We will have more for you in minutes.
Meanwhile, the Southeast has been bracing for some severe weather tonight. Rainfall already causing flooding in states such as Georgia and Tennessee, but we're told that's not all. Meteorologist Adam Klotz live in the Fox Weather Center with that. Hi, Adam.
Hey there, Eric. Yeah, unfortunately, the system is going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. This is the setup behind me the last 24 hours. A lot of moisture rolling off the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see a huge area of rain, actually the backside of this very same system. Some very heavy snow, likely blizzard conditions running across portions of the northern plains and then eventually into the upper Midwest. But focusing now on the southeast, a large area from Memphis, so getting down into southwestern Tennessee and then down into portions of Mississippi. All areas, Eric, we're going to be paying very close attention to tonight, as we could see not only big severe thunderstorms, but possibly tornadoes in this area, and this could be lingering into early Sunday morning.
All right, Adam, thanks so much. Martha?
Embattled R&B singer R. Kelly has his day in court facing charges over alleged encounters with 4 female victims, 3 of them minors at the time. We're live in Chicago.